When your book first came out, I think people were surprised to hear that you wrote that you hated tennis. Tell us again what you meant by that for people who didn't hear it.
Well, the thing is I don't say I had a love-hate with tennis. I had a hate-love with tennis. It's one of these things. It's a sport that was imposed on me, a life that I kind of found myself in. I was a baby of 4. My father pushed us all into tennis pretty hard, and me being the most sort of talented and the last of the hopes, got the brunt of a lot of dreams on my shoulders. So I grew up with a lot of angst. Got sent away to an academy when I was 13 years old that I kind of referred to as a glorified prison camp, and as a result, I did a lot of self-explorations and never really had time or the tools to understand my own rebellions.
Did you have fun when you were winning?
I suppose there were moments that were fun, but that's what also confused me. I mean, it really was a life I didn't have ownership of till I was 27 years old. I had a 9th grade education, so the truth be told, the reason why I didn't quit for most of those years is I was just flat out scared to. Didn't know what I would do if I had.
You didn't graduate from high school?
No, that's correct.
Did you go back to school after?
No, I feel like I've been in school for the last 25 years.
Do you think the way that your father raised you, and you write about not just pressure, but berating you if you lost, a lot of that kind of negativity, do you think it actually turned you into a winner, that despite the toll it took on you, that it was effective from a coaching standpoint?
Well, I think his intensity was something that he instilled in me. Perfectionism, I don't know if that's really you're born with it or your environment sort of makes you that, but it was never good enough as it relates to tennis, as it relates to my successes through my father's eyes. I did represent him in an accurate light in the sense that he's a very intense man, but also a very loyal man, a man that always made me feel like it was us against the world. And so along with that intensity came a real relationship that was hard for me to really place. But ultimately, I think you need to be born with talent and you need it to be nurtured. I don't know if it needs to be nurtured in that sort of way.
Were your top tennis peers raised the same way? Is this a common path to the top?
Well, I think you'll see that a lot in sports. Individual sports, you probably would see it more. I think people feel more in control of their destiny, and parents tend to stay involved longer in a professional life. If you're a baseball player, you're one of those little league parents. I mean, sooner or later, the kid moves on to a coach in high school, moves on to a coach in college, and eventually to a manager of a team. So it's a different world being out there by yourself, and you need to have yourself surrounded by people, and sometimes those parents just assume it all.
Staying on the education, the coaching, the training of young athletes, tennis legend John McEnroe has set up a tennis academy on Randall's Island here in New York, and he's operating under the philosophy that complete immersion is not only bad for a kid's development as a person, but also bad for that athlete's tennis game. You were sent to the famous Nick Bollettieri Academy in Florida as a kid. You turned pro at 16. You were as immersed as possible. I gather John's brother, Patrick McEnroe, who many of us know as a tennis commentator, has an entirely different approach in his tennis academy. He's all for immersion. You have an opinion?
Well, I think as a parent, you have to first decision you have to make is define what success is for you. What's going to make me a successful parent? What's going to make my kids successful in my own eyes? And I think if you start with saying they have to be great at something, I think you're starting with the wrong decision, and you're going to make a lot of other wrong ones as a result.
As opposed to what?
Well, for me, it's as opposed to empathy. For example, teaching a child how to see life through other people's eyes, considering that success, knowing that your child will be then equipped in whatever he chooses to do, to not be doing it in a vacuum and to not be doing it in an unawareness of his environment, people he's working with, people he's creating with, whatever that child might choose to do with their life.
Was that tough for you to come to? Because certainly when you get raised as a sports prodigy, everything is you. Your ego is fed to such a tremendous degree. This happens with so many star child athletes. Did that happen to you, and did you have to work on becoming empathetic toward others?
I did. I made it a huge priority in my life. I rebelled against my sport. I rebelled against some of those imposed labels and judgments, and I found myself learning a lot about myself the hard way, which was through the criticisms and through the this world stage that I was acting out these rebellions on, and that's not always the easiest way to learn, but you start to realize that, geez, life is a bit broader than you ever realized.
And you've started to devote your time to a whole other kind of education. Since you retired in '06, you've started the Andre Agassi College Preparatory Academy in Las Vegas, a K through 12 public charter school for at-risk children. Why did you decide to get involved in something like that?
I helped children with my foundation since I was 23 years old, but quickly got to a point where I felt like we were always reacting to problems and not being proactive. And the only way to make really systemic change in a child's life is to give them the tools. I mean, I always felt a lack of education in my own life. I always felt overmatched by books and intimidated by big cities and traveling the world and never quite getting as much out of it as I could have had I had education. With education, I believe, comes not only hope, but also comes choice. I lived a life that didn't have choice for a long time, and these children that don't have an education, that don't happen to be great at tennis or a given sport, what are their alternatives? They wake up in a life they don't choose, and that means gangs, and that means jails, and that means prisons, and so I just thought if we can just give those tools. And so I added education to my work, and then education became my work.